Okay, so now that you've watched the introductory video on bracketing, let's go ahead and apply what we know to the XE2. Okay, in front of me I have a little knife over there, and that will be our subject to illustrate our point. Okay, so go ahead and turn on your camera. I'm going to show you guys the drive mode on this camera. Just keep in mind that the drive mode has other functions other than the ones I'm going to show you, but we're just sticking to bracketing today. Okay, so I'm going to kneel behind the camera here. Alright, so go to drive, and that's this button right here on my left. And again, we're sticking to just bracketing stuff today for the XE2. You see that thing right there, the third one? That is the AE bracket, auto exposure bracket. We talked a little bit about that in the introductory video. And here are the intervals I was talking about. There's a plus minus 1, plus minus 2/3, plus minus 1/3. This is in regards to whatever baseline you have set to at the time. So let's just say we're at plus minus 1. As I said before in the other video, if your setting is at 0, which most likely it will be, plus minus 1 is going to result in which 3 pictures? One's going to be at 0, and the other one is going to be at 1, and the other one's going to be at minus 1. Plus minus 1. What about plus minus 2/3? Okay, if we have it set here and we go ahead and take a picture in bracketing mode, it will go ahead and take pictures plus minus 2/3 from where your base is. So, one here and one here. So 3 pictures total. What if you chose this one, plus minus 1/3? What do you think that would do when you press to take a picture in bracketing mode if you were set at 0? It would result in one here, and one here, just below the 0 mark. Okay, so what this is saying is it'll take one picture at your baseline and then one overexposed and one underexposed. Just depends on how much or how little you want. How cool is that? Okay, so let's go ahead before we take any more pictures. Before we take any pictures, actually, let's go ahead and go through this. Same thing, ISO. ISO is slightly different than auto exposure because auto exposure is not going to have the same side effects as the ISO. ISO is like it controls graininess, controls dynamic range, it controls a bunch of different things, and for the most part, exposure, right? So in different ways, you can control this one or this one depending on what desirability you want. So we can also have film simulation brackets. So you can control exposure by using this and this bracket, the ISO bracket as well. But you can also do bracketing in terms of film simulation. So instead of plus or minus 1 in terms of how bright or how dark you want it for test shooting, for example, you can also use it for black and white pictures, have one in black and white, have one in sepia, and have one in punchy velvia or standard shooting, for example. They also have another bracket for dynamic range. Okay, you can also pick that and shoot that way. See, it took 3 right there, and that's just one example. Let's go back to drive, and I'm going to go to the auto exposure bracket. To make the most dramatic difference you can see on camera, I'm going to go ahead and pick the plus minus 1. I'm going to press menu OK. I'm going to focus on my subject, and note that I am going to have to set this to 0, which is the baseline here. Now watch what happens. I'm going to take a picture right now. It took 3 pictures. Now these pictures are going to be identical because I'm on a flat surface, and it's going to come out pretty identical. If you're not on a flat surface, you take a picture of a person, the pictures may not line up in the end. But the goal here is not to make sure the pictures line up. That's something completely different. This is just to see where I like my exposure levels. Okay, so I'm going to press play here on my left side, and I can see this is a little underexposed, this is a little higher exposed, and this is just where the baseline was. So let's go through it again. The camera takes the baseline one that is really high up there in exposure, +1 to be exact, and -1. Okay? So you're looking at it and say, oh, you know what? I was right on the money. This is the perfect exposure for me. Or just to be safe, I can go a little darker to get more detail later. Let's say Photoshop it. Or I just like things bright. You know, that's perfectly okay too. And nothing's really overexposed here. This actually looks okay. So it kind of gives you test shots right there, right to begin with. Boom, boom, boom. You can decide right there. Now, let's go back to Drive. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave it at ±1. And to illustrate my point that I made in the introductory video, I'm going to go ahead and move this to make a point to +2. Okay, now it should be very overexposed. Okay, it's pretty bright. I wouldn't say it's overexposed, but the background is pretty blown out for being a white wall. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just please note that I'm not here. See that single camera right there? I just pressed Drive. I'm not in a single camera. If I press this, the still image one, and press OK, I'm just taking that one picture. This is not bracketing. I press Drive again, and now I can go down to AE bracket ±1, whichever one I want. Now I'm in bracketing mode. But keep in mind, I just changed it to +2 exposure, very bright. I don't need that being indoors and all that with plenty of lights around me, but just to prove a point, I'm going to press the shutter now. Same thing, it took 3 pictures. I'm going to press play here. This is the first picture. This is the +2 that I'm set at right now, the baseline. Okay, now the ±1 interval, the bracketing is going to be based around where my baseline is at. It's not going to go back to +1, -1, because now I'm at +2. It's going to go to +3 and +1. Okay, because that's where my baseline is. That's where the interval will now surround, depending on where this is set. And that's up to you. So this is the +2. Now I'm going to the intervals now. It got really hot at +3. And one went down to +1. So now it's at +1. It doesn't look so bad now, does it? You can't really tell on camera right now, but seeing it live, it actually looks pretty good. So that's kind of what happens when you're playing around with the baseline and bracketing and auto exposure. I'm going to go back to Drive here. Oops. You don't notice the Drive is also, when you're viewing pictures, it's a magnifying glass, so you can zoom in and out using these buttons here when you're looking at pictures. But when you're not looking at pictures and you're in live view, pressing the Drive will go into these special functions here. Now, same thing, the ISO can change by ±1, ±2/3, ±1/3. Okay, now we can go to dynamic range bracket here, or the film simulation bracket. I'm going to go into the film simulation bracket because I feel that is the most different in terms of bracketing than these other 3 options. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and press this by pressing OK. I'm also going to lower my exposure back down to 0. I just brought it to +2 to prove a point. Here at normal exposure now, I'm going to take a picture. Okay, so you notice that it actually only took 1 picture, and it probably went ahead and edited that one into the other forms of, I guess, pictures that they had available that I had set to. I'm going to press play to view it. So you can't really tell here, but I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. This is the first picture it took, probably in standard. You can't really tell too much of a difference. Maybe this one is classic chrome, I'm not sure. Maybe this one's classic chrome. So instead of ±1 in terms of exposure or ISO, we're now doing bracketing in terms of film simulation, right? So let's go ahead and make this a little bit more dramatic so you can see it. Let's go to menu. Oops. Let's go press half shutter button to get out of that. Press menu here. I'm going to go to film simulation bracket. Okay, you'll notice when I press film simulation bracket in the Drive mode, it just picked film simulation bracket, and that's because you choose which film simulations you actually want in the bracket here. Okay, so there's film 1, film 2, and film 3. You couldn't really tell the difference as I was shooting it, but now that I'm showing you which ones are being taken, you can kind of see what's going on. So let's say film 1 is standard. Film 2, let's make this into let's make this a really sharp black and white. And then make film 3, let's make this a little different too. How about this one? There's a little brown look to it. Okay, so we set the bracket, again, 3 pictures, 1, 2, and 3. Standard black and white with the green filter, and sepia as your 3rd picture. Okay, go ahead and press back here. And that's where you set your film simulation bracket, right in the menu. Half press your shutter button. Okay, so go back to Drive here. And just check that you're in the film simulation bracket, not the ISO, not the AE bracket, but the film simulation bracket. Press OK here, and now we're going to take a picture. Listen. It only took 1 picture, but it went ahead and edited it into the other 2 forms that you wanted in that film simulation bracket. Let's look them over right now. Press play. It'll go to the most recent picture. Okay, this is the standard. This is the black and white with green filter, really sharp looking if I say so myself. And the last one is a sepia picture, also very nice. Since we're in picture viewing mode, I can go ahead and zoom in and take a look at the quality there. Yeah, really sharp. I like that. Awesome. Okay. So that's film simulation bracket on the XE2. Hopefully you guys can definitely play around with that. You can see the value here. You can, with 1 shot, you can get 3 of the same pictures. You won't miss that opportunity. You can take a look at it and say, oh, you know what? I didn't think I would, but I really like the sepia one more than I like the black and white. So I think I'll spend some time in the sepia more than these other 2. So that's kind of the value in using the film simulation bracket, or bracketing in general. It gives you more options to look at right away. You can pick which one and which direction to go from there. Okay, so that concludes the video for the XE2 in the bracketing. All right, talk to you guys soon.